Okay, so this talk, in quotes, is basically just a collection of some learnings that have happened with my team over the course of just about 5 years, scaling up from a team of 2 developers, one of whom was a co-founder, so did a lot of non-developing things as well, to a team that is now something over 40 and continuing to grow rapidly. So here we are. So I'm first engineer at Tapad, company's acquired. You've already stolen my thunder here, but we'll just move right into it then. Okay, so first things first, do the basics. No illegal questions. You should have some kind of HR person who will tell you all these things, but you cannot ask candidates questions like, hey, how did you get to this interview?
Yeah, no, that's pretty good, right?
Oh, I'm cheating. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. Okay, I don't know how to use technology very well. It's a miracle we got that exit. Yeah. Okay, let's see if this works now. Nope. Okay, I might have to go from memory. It should be interesting. Okay, so, thanks for the heads up over there.
You view the notes on your phone.
There you go. Okay, so yeah, no illegal questions. This is stuff that's really just par for the course, but when I started giving interviews a long time ago, actually nobody told me this, and it seemed like a pretty reasonable thing to ask someone like, oh, hey, where do you live? Oh, I know that neighborhood, that's a really great pub, and that actually could get you into hot water. So just starting from ground zero, you don't ask about race, religion, location, and so on, obviously. Now on to some of the more fun stuff. Starting as a very small company, you have to sell the team and the dream. This is very important because it's most likely that you don't have a giant bankroll and you're not going to pay Google salaries, total comp. You're not going to pay whatever Uber is paying now. You're not going to pay bank salaries. But what you can sell is something intangible, which is arguably much, much more valuable. You can sell autonomy. You can sell mastery. You can sell the option to be part of the founding team that creates everything, owns everything, that can change the course of an entire company. And that's not something that you get everywhere. So this is definitely the point that you need to hit at those early stage interviews. And you'll find different personalities sort of attract themselves to a larger company or a smaller company. So if the candidate knows that you're a small company and they've shown up at your doorstep, you're probably in a pretty decent place already because they know the risks to a degree. They want to get in on the ground floor. But it's important to get right. Every single person that you hire is going to create your culture. People are culture, culture are people. It's one and the same thing. So I've found that it's harder to sort of indoctrinate somebody into culture. They should be sort of a little bit following the same ideals as your culture. These are things you need to suss out in addition to technical ability. Of course, you cannot get biased, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So sell the team, sell the dream, get people psyched about it, and this is what works. Okay, next. Those awkward years. You have built your team from 2 to, let's say, 16, something like that. Your company is growing, your company is scaling, business is going up and to the right. All of a sudden, you're a dreaded mid-sized company. What does this mean? You still are probably not paying the highest salaries. All of a sudden, your equity is no longer as meaningful as it once was because you've given out a bunch of it, you've taken multiple rounds. What do? You're kind of caught between both sides. This is really tough. But think about the products that you're building. You probably have a million competitors as well. They're selling similar things. That does not mean you just go give up. It means you differentiate to figure out why is your engineering team, why is your culture different and better than everyone else. And this is an ongoing process that you need to sort of commit to quality, get out into the community, talk about these things. You can certainly try to pay your way out of this problem. You say, oh, we're a medium-sized company. A senior developer is going to know, I know, these guys have some legacy code hiding in the dark corners, and I don't want to maintain it because I'm leaving my company because I don't want to maintain my own legacy code or something like that. So you cannot pull the wool over people's eyes. You have to be honest, but you know that there's still growth ahead. So you can sell that pitch. You have impact. This is still a relatively small company. Medium-sized company is very small compared to a Google, compared to a Microsoft. You can have impact. You can grow with the company. So that's how you're supposed to get past those awkward years. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the long road of recruiting. This is something that takes such a serious time investment. This is from sourcing. If you have internal recruiters or external recruiters, someone is on the phones, someone is going on LinkedIn Recruiter and searching, or they're following GitHub or whatever. This takes a lot of time, and it's absolutely essential. I want to say there are no shortcuts. There sort of are, but they are very, very risky. So what I mean by this is, let's say, names anonymized, you end up in a situation in which you've fallen behind on recruiting for, say, many months. You have not hit your hiring goals. However, business continues to scale. Your talented engineering team will buckle down. They'll do the work because, honestly, technology is the ultimate leverage. This is why people talk about 10x engineers, because you write some code, all of a sudden, these things just start happening magically. This is the beauty. This is why we're into this stuff. So you can sort of like push people a little bit further, but then the end point is you're going to burn people out. So you need to always kind of stay on that recruiting, on the road show. And if you want to catch up because you're behind, you can turn on the external recruiter faucet, and you'll get a lot of candidates in the top of your funnel. So this is kind of the shortcut because all of a sudden you have access to many, many candidates. But the downside is that it takes a very long time to recalibrate this process. If the recruiters don't understand you and your company very well and your product and your personalities, then you're going to go through round after round after round of rejection. And the recruiters will say, well, I don't even want to work with you. I've sent you 100 resumes, and you've said 2 are acceptable for a phone screen. I'm just going to go peddle my wares down the street and make more money. So this is why I feel pretty strongly that you do need to play both sides of the coin and work with external recruiters. Some are very, very, very talented. Bamboo, what up? But you also need to bring it in-house as well. This is the lifeblood of your company. If you're a tech company, you need engineers. So bring it in-house and really embrace it. So some easy ways to kind of play that game. The long game is to basically get out there. So go to meetups, host meetups, blog, tweet, sponsor things. I didn't realize how valuable sponsorship really was until I started going to the same conferences a couple years in a row. And I realized that I knew all these people and all these companies just because some of them had banners up on the top of the board. And I work in advertising, so I'm blind. I should know. I thought I was blind to ads, but it turns out it actually does sort of work. So if you're consistent, so we're a Scala shop. We sponsor Scala days and any Scala and so on. And by showing up year after year, conference after conference, people start to understand, okay, this is a real company, they're doing real stuff, they're consistent, they haven't folded. Neat. Let's go see what they're all about. So stay on the horse. Check my notes to make sure I didn't forget. Okay, right. So the other part the point that I wanted to make about the risks of falling behind, when you turn on the recruiter faucet, all of a sudden you get all these resumes. What comes after that? Phone screens, on-site interviews with your burned out engineering staff who is already doing more work than they should have been doing anyway because somebody dropped the ball on recruiting. So this is, you can almost make a parallel to technical debt. It's not going to burn you right off the bat, but it will build up, and if you do not manage it, then you're going to be in trouble. Almost used French there. Okay, so who is the perfect candidate? Does anyone have a perfect candidate in mind of the absolute next person you know that you want to hire? You do?
Yes.
Who is it? What are they like?
If I can give you their name, you're going to go higher.
Fair enough.
They're the opposite of anyone on my team.
Fantastic. Did everyone hear that? The perfect candidate is the opposite of everyone on his team. So diversity is important. The counterpoint is that someone who's very different from you, you might have a harder time understanding them or communicating with them or so on. But then you have a difference of opinions, and the average of these diverse, independent opinions is probably going to create a better whole. That whole is the engineering team. So it's important to kind of balance, do you understand this person, but do they bring something else to the table? Diversity is definitely very important here. Everyone wants senior developers, right? How do you get them? You don't want to hire too many senior developers if you don't have the work for them. If you hire a PhD, machine learning superstar, and the current work that you need to do has nothing to do with that, is probably a wasted hire unless you have something coming down the pipe pretty soon. If you're able to sell them on that anyway, you should get into recruiting. Okay, so on the other side, what about a junior candidate? You got some very bright, hungry people coming out of school, maybe coming out of grad school, maybe a couple jobs under their belt, and they're ready to hustle. Tapad had a great experience with this. We had a very large sort of recruiting rush, I would say, 2 years ago, where we got a lot of people just out of school. And they're sort of so eager. They're not burned out at all. Studying for finals is nothing compared to feature crunches when you're trying to chase deadlines. But we ended up getting to this situation where we were lacking the senior mentorship for these junior folks. So they were off to the races, writing all sorts of awesome code and sort of generally following good practices and so on. But there also is a balance. So Nitu talked about having the engineering managers and tech leads perform code reviews. If you don't have enough people to burn down all your code reviews, then people will get frustrated, the junior developers who are waiting for their code review, because they're just sitting on it. They want to ship features. So there's definitely a bit of a balancing act here between sort of senior and junior. You'll tend to get, at least for Tapad this is true, you'll tend to get a lot of junior folks right about now when they're graduating from school. We've had a lot of success with this by getting out to all the college career fairs. This is probably something I should have mentioned in the last slide, but definitely do it. College career fairs. The people who have graduated from universities, go back to your alma maters. The staff love that. They will talk you up, and it's very inspiring to see someone from your school come back and say, the incredible knowledge that I learned here has taken me to this company, which is now growing and successful and solving really tough problems. And you already have a little bit of an initial bond there. So definitely consider that. Okay, some more cheating. Yes. Okay. Most important thing, arguably, probably shouldn't have forgotten it, define the role really clearly. So this is something that we stumbled on very early on, where we knew generally we need more developers. You're a developer, get more of yourself somehow. And these roles were not so well defined. Clone yourself, that would be easier. But one person would think, oh, we want a senior developer. One person would think, oh, actually, we want a junior developer. One person would think, we need a data scientist who is going to manage and not write code. It was not as diverse of a set of opinions as that, but by not having your own team know exactly what role you're trying to fill, you'll also project, if not incompetence, then at least confusion to the candidate. Because one person's saying, oh, this role is great, you get to write a lot of code, and the other person's saying, oh, this role means that you have to manage this team and write some unit tests or something like that. Everyone needs to be on the same page, from the recruiter to the hiring manager and to the team. It's very easy. Just do it. I've seen a lot of companies not do it, and as a result, it's very confusing, and the hiring process does not work as well. Okay, how do you get those mythical senior developers? Just follow these 4 steps. So they're all kind of different. Any of them may work one way or another. First of all, it's probably the way that you want to get most of your developers is by wowing them. You want to show off a great engineering culture, show them the accomplishments that you've made, show off the bots that you make. That's fun. You do fun stuff as well as doing challenging work. Show off the incredible improvements in infrastructure that has taken the company from a bit of a crisis into a place that's really just taking off. Good developers want to work with other good developers on interesting problems. I think this is fairly obvious. So make sure that you are putting your best foot forward. don't have a generic job rec that says senior developer might know Java or Scala or C#, and might write Node or something. It doesn't, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe they will do all those things, but for a more senior role, you are speaking with somebody who has been around the block. They probably know what they like, what they don't like, and so on. Pitch them on a project. Don't pitch them on a general role that anyone could fit into. Interviewing is very much a two-way street, especially so for more senior candidates because they know what they're looking for. More junior candidates, sometimes they do, sometimes they just want a job. Got to pay down that student debt somehow. But pitching a specific project is found to be much more effective than a general role. So wow them. Second of all, grow them. Every senior developer was once a junior developer. Tapad, again, has had great success here. Those juniors that we hired 2 years ago, they're not juniors anymore. They're very productive, they understand the code base, and they're absolutely crushing it. So invest in education. Send your developers to conferences. It's also a good recruiting tool. Potentially pay for training, dedicate 20% time to learning, pay for some courses. There's a million ways to do this, but invest in your people. It's also going to make them more committed to the company because they know that this is a long-term thing. That's better for everyone involved. If you think about the ramp-up time for somebody to become productive on your team, this could range from, let's say, maybe a month, maybe 3 months, hopefully not more than 6 months, but that's downtime if they're not fully up to speed. After someone has come up to speed, then they're just cruising. So you can hire this junior developer, train them, they train themselves, and all of a sudden they're off to the races. Third, pay them more. If you claim to be hiring the top 10% of developers and you're paying at the 40th percentile, let me tell you, if someone's taking that job, they're not very good at math. Right? They're not very aware. You might be able to get them with an interesting project. That's compelling. People will take pay hits all the time to work on an interesting problem or to work with interesting people. But if you're offering a generic problem, a generic role, and you want someone who's really good and you're paying way under market, it's not going to work. So check, take the pulse of where people are. Make sure you're paying something fair. This is a total comp thing, so it can be base, it can be bonus, it can be equity. It all comes into play. But if you find yourself having trouble hiring senior developers, and you're paying very low, there you have found your problem. And the last one, I feel like I probably should have learned this one quite a long time ago, but I feel like it was much more of a recent observation for me. Just wait. A lot of people they're quite comfortable in their jobs, and some small pay raise, or maybe even a large pay raise, won't entice them. An interesting project won't entice them because they're already working on an interesting project with people that they know and respect already. So it's a risk to move companies. So what do? Just wait, just talk to them, build a relationship. At some point, maybe they're ready to move on. They'll remember you, or you'll reach out at exactly the right time, and then they'll want to come join your company. Maybe they finished the last project, it's sort of time to move on, life change, and now they can come to you. This is a waiting game, and this goes back to that earlier point about recruiting being a long road. You just got to be out there constantly. It's a numbers game to a degree. Okay, so now going a little bit more from the meta to the concrete here. What is it that actually makes a good interview question and process? I guess you can tell from these 4 points, but being clear, repeatable, and respectful is kind of very simple 3 things that you can hit. Candidates don't know what your process is unless you tell them. I would say everyone probably more or less has some kind of phone call, and then maybe someone comes on site. Maybe you had a hacker rank style coding exercise or something like that. But not necessarily. Maybe the candidate hasn't interviewed in 10 years and they don't remember what the process is like. Maybe they're just coming out of school and they don't know what the process is like. Just tell them. This should not be a secret that you're trying to guard, but I'm surprised by how many people actually leave the candidates completely in the dark about this. And then it's already a stressful situation. You're coming into this new place and people are going to ask you hard questions and you have to stand up next to a whiteboard maybe. So just be clear, repeat the process early and often. You say, okay, Joe Schmo, we're going to call you at this time, and then, assuming that goes well, we're going to have a technical phone screen, you're going to write some code. Then, assuming that goes well, you're going to come on site, you'll be here for, half a day, you'll meet with anywhere between 2 and 4 people, we'll take you out to lunch. That's it, basic. Use a repeatable process. So, of course, you're not always going to hire for exactly the same role, but in order to compare candidates fairly, they have to go through more or less the exact same process. Otherwise, if someone does a 1-hour interview, someone else does an 8-hour interview, you just can't really compare apples to apples here. So come up with a process with your team and use the same thing for everyone. Of course, there will be some tweaks. Maybe one candidate has to, they're not going to take a day off work, so they'll come in 4 times after hours. Someone else will take the day off and just do it all in one day, whatever. But it should be as repeatable as possible. And finally, respectful. You may have a candidate who did well on a phone screen. They come in and they completely bomb the first question, like unbelievably bad. How did this person get past the phone screen? This is clearly not a fit. Don't just cut them off. They might have taken the day off from their job to do this, or they might have traveled. Give them the respect of a little bit more time. Take them to the second interview. Maybe they were just nervous. Interviews are inherently a little bit adversarial. So I've seen multiple times where someone has done not so well on the first interview, and then they picked it up in the second one, and then kind of really started running with it in the later interviews. And it was very much just because they were nervous. So give them a chance. It's respectful to them, and it also might find you a fantastic candidate that you otherwise would have had a false negative on. Second of all, speed. I'm really embarrassed to admit that we have lost candidates because we just didn't email them back quickly enough to say, hey, we think you're fantastic. Please come join our company. We waited the weekend, someone else sent them an email, and we lost the candidate. It's already so hard to find a decent developer who likes your company and you like them and it's a good fit and everything's fine. Don't let this simple thing screw it all up. It's a real tragedy. And incidentally, some of the times when that happened at Tapad, there was not quite a clear clarification of whose job was it to send this. Was it the engineering manager who was supposed to send the email? Was it the recruiter? Was it someone else? So there's just a little bit of miscommunication. I'm happy to say it's safely solved by now, but pick one point person. They're always going to be on communication. They should email back really, really, really fast. Think about it from your shoes when you were interviewing at some point in the past. You're sort of anxiously waiting to know what happened. Did they like me? Did they not like me? It's stressful, so just respond quickly. They'll be happy about it. You'll also find for companies that have been around for a little bit, you're going to start getting Glassdoor reviews. And if you're slow, they're going to say, oh, this recruiter didn't email me back for 2 weeks, so they don't have their act together. Just doesn't look good, and it's so easy to solve. Okay, so we already talked about the jitters thing a little bit, but just make sure that you are making these people comfortable. Don't come in adversarially. That doesn't do anyone any good. I don't think anyone sort of codes while arguing, so just chat with them a little bit. Don't ask how they got there, but just generally chat. What do you think about technology? Do you like our office plants? Whatever it takes. But just, chit-chat. We're people too. Okay, so finally, bias. So this took a couple of rounds to get right at Tapad, but I think we have it down pretty well now. And essentially, we make sure that there is a sort of Chinese wall between each round of interview. So the phone screen person is allowed to give feedback about, yes, we thought they were a really good coder, or they were like a little bit sloppy, but very creative, or whatever. But when we're on site, we have scheduled interviews. This is a point here for the repeatable process. We know ahead of time who is going to interview the candidate, at what time, what question are they going to ask, who's coming next, and so on. In between those rounds, we'll do like a sort of handoff in the sense of you tap your coworker on the shoulder and say, hey, I wrapped up, it's your turn to go in. But you don't say, she was awesome, best coder I've ever seen. Or, this guy can code, blindfolded with his left hand only and his right hand is just typing as well, I guess. don't bias. So people are very, very, very easy to influence. If you say, this person's really good, they're going to go in thinking, oh, they're really good. And they might just completely gloss over some, let's say, horrible mistakes that the candidate is making that really need to be paid attention to because they've already trusted your judgment here. So I cannot stress this enough. This is probably the most important one. Don't share information as the interview is going on. Share it afterwards. When you're done, immediately go to your feedback form, whatever, type up some notes, and then recap later, but don't bias during the process. You will influence people unduly, and you want to have a diverse set of independent opinions, not related ones. Okay, so, yep. Okay, so how do you actually evaluate? Oh, sorry. We're going to go into questions a little bit. A good interview question is what I call a scalable one. This means it should start off easy. You can solve some naive implementation, like no problem. It uses a ton of memory. It's really slow, but it works. It's somehow correct. And then you can take it to the next step where you make it use only a little bit of memory, and it's still correct. You take it to the next step, and then it runs really fast, and it doesn't use very much memory, and it's correct. And then, depending on how quickly you go, then you make it web scale, and it's still correct, and so on. But the point is that you can get there by thinking. You can write an implementation using a laptop, on the whiteboard, either one, using the standard library of this language without some sort of incredible feat of ingenuity or a sudden moment of clarity. No brain teasers. This is not really how we work. We write code. That's what we do. So you should be able to sort of get through it progressively. Incidentally, the reason I chose this picture is because everyone hates on whiteboard interviews so much, especially if you read Hacker News. It's like the worst thing ever. So we give candidates a choice. You can bring in your own laptop, you can use the internet, you can use documentation. If you don't have one, we'll provide one for you, or you can write on the whiteboard. And I'm really surprised a lot of people choose the whiteboard. Maybe they practice that way or whatever, but it's not as hated as one might think. Okay, so evaluation, it should focus on problem-solving process, how clearly the candidate communicates, and how in-depth they know their stuff. There are multiple people who've been hired at Tapad and would wager in other places who they didn't get the interview question correct. There's something wrong with the solution. It just kind of never got going, but the problem-solving process was in place. You could see this candidate understood the context of the question, figured out what the boundaries are, decomposed it into sub-problems, and had a process where, given time, they will solve the problem. It's like software engineering in its truest form. You have some apparently insurmountable problem, doesn't matter, you're going to get there. You chip away and you'll solve it. I think these types of candidates are the absolute best. You don't have to get the thing right, but you have to have the process right. It's like a scientific method sort of thing. Just keep on going and you will solve it. Communication is obvious. I'm running low on time, so I'm going to breeze through the next ones. Depth and detail are important. Don't hand wave. A lot of people can talk pretty well at a high level, and you're thinking the best of the candidate. Oh, I know exactly what they're saying. Maybe you don't. Ask. And they'll either say something really intelligent, and you're like, oh, great. Or they'll say, you know what, actually I don't know any more depth than this. This is the limit. It's also fine, it's honest. Or they might just expose the fact that they don't have so much knowledge on this, which is important as well. These are personality traits I think are important. Humility is big, and initiative also is big. We want people who can self-manage. They should have clear principles. You don't want them to go overboard. Communications, just hit it again. Intelligence is obvious. Okay, 2 anecdata. There's no science to back this up as far as I can tell, but after interviewing dozens, hundreds, probably of candidates, I think that people who understand recursion well just seem to be above average at programming. I suspect it's something to do with abstract reasoning that is very comfortable with these concepts that don't really map to the physical world necessarily. And that's where a lot of development happens. So if they're great at that, then I'd say that's a big +1. And people who are really anal about spacing, I gotta tell you, it's an attention to detail thing. Don't knock them if they have funny variable names or bad spacing, because this is very teachable stuff. But if they are very anal about this, I would say that's a good sign. It's a +1. And yeah, so finally, I mentioned the Glassdoor one. Basically, just be aware of it. You might have some of the questions that you ask show up there, so maybe you don't want to ask them again. And then this one popped up not too long ago. I call it collaborative problem-solving rings. Someone else might call it a cheating ring. We found surprisingly multiple occasions where candidates are actually working together to, so to say, defeat the interview process, where they're sharing very detailed information about the questions that we ask, the personalities of the people who are giving the questions, and all sorts of things like this. And it's a great set of problem solvers. Maybe we should just hire them all. Yeah. They work together, they communicate, you know. But I just had to throw it out there because I thought it was kind of nutty how much detail was going into these message boards. So the solution that we have to that is basically we have a large bank of questions, and they hit 3 general things. So there's a practical where we want actually get on the keyboard, code up something really simple to see if you are comfortable in a coding environment. Do something with algorithms and data structures, and something with concurrency. You can imagine any large set of questions here. But they can all have divergent endings. So that's kind of the idea here. If someone has aced a phone screen and then is doing suspiciously poorly on a similar type of problem, they may have shared information. So, you know, honestly, it's fine. Sometimes people memorize this stuff and then they regurgitate it, and then that's not the only question they're going to get. We're going to continue talking. So you can't fake your way through this whole thing. It actually ends up being just a waste of time if they actually are not a good candidate. But if you have a question that can sort of grow and then branch into a different way, to change this constraint or change the memory constraint or the CPU constraint or whatever, then it doesn't really matter if people are sharing information because you have to think through these problems anyway. That's it.
Toby, thank you. So running a little short on time, so maybe we do 1 or 2 questions. Go ahead.
What do you think about actually making them work with you before you plan to hire?
Yeah, so we've never thought about it that far. We've thought about it to the extent of giving a sort of homework assignment, like a take-home type of thing, and then as the first round of on-site, we do a code review and add some features to it. That one might come into play, maybe as an optional thing. We would never enforce it. And for the week-long thing, I think also we would never enforce it because people search for jobs while they're working. They'll often already take 1 or 2 days off of work to interview, and for them to take an entire week off of work, I don't think I would do it. I wouldn't ask someone else to do it. If they want to, that would be great. You're going to learn a lot. But I think, you know, for what it's worth, it's not realistic for most candidates.
How do you decide on a hire? Do you need to be unanimous in a team, or how do you go about actually evaluating when we get hired first?
Yeah, so earlier, could everyone hear the question? How do you actually make the go, no-go? Early on, we had a unanimous thumbs-up policy where everyone had to be on board. And now it's a little bit looser, because people will be convinced more one way or another. But because we have that policy of everyone putting in their yes-no decision first, and then we sort of do a vote like 1, 2, 3, thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't know. That leaves room for unbiased communication afterwards. So someone might say, I say no, but like if this other thing was covered in another interview, then I would be convinced. But if anyone is a firm no, then it's going to be a no. But it's very common that someone will be a bit ambivalent and they'll be convinced by someone who had a stronger signal in a different interview. But we do make the decision as a group.
Let's do 1 more, yeah.
Sorry.
How were you hired?
How was I hired? So I came in via an external recruiter, someone that I knew from before, and we kind of worked at Tapad for a long time as well. And I had an interview with the CEO. I wrote some Ruby on the board, wrote some Monoid stuff. We talked a lot about technology and work process and so on. Met the rest of the team. At the time, there were 3 other people, so it was a pretty small team. The process has certainly changed. But basically, it was whiteboard coding, and just a lot of discussion about how I do work. Like, what is my philosophy on getting work done?
Tabs or spaces?
I'm sorry?
Tabs or spaces?
Tabs or spaces? Oh, 2 spaces all day. All right, thanks. I think that's all the time.
Toby, thank you very much.